Welcome to the Scotch on the Rocks Mountain Weather Talk, Part 1. In this short presentation, we're going to sort of look at what we need to know from a weather forecast and how and why mountain weather forecasts are slightly different to the forecast that we get for a town or a city. So to start off with, here's a forecast for Kingussie in Speyside. The question there at the top says, what's wrong with the forecast, other than the fact that it's bright sunshine and really warm in Scotland. And for us as mountain leaders, I think the answer is fairly clear that it's not a relevant forecast really for us if we're going into the mountains. But it might be the only forecast that we can get. Less and less so now, because in Britain we have some amazing sort of forecast sources. But it's worth bearing in mind that, you know, the best forecast, the most reliable forecast that we get might not be for a mountain or a mountain area. So where do we go for our forecasts nowadays? Well, we're incredibly lucky. You know, top left there, 9 times out of 10, we'll just pull out our phone, we'll get our 4G coverage, 5G, who knows now, and be able to download something, go onto, you know, a specific website. But that could also, obviously, it doesn't have to be on your phone, it can be computer at home before you go out, etc., etc. If you can't get you know, access to some form of computer, tablet or phone whilst you're out and about, for whatever reason, it might be that a tourist information centre, or sometimes outdoor shops or ski centres, places like that will often publish the forecast. They'll just print off a forecast, you know, and therefore stick it up and you can get access to it that way. The Met Office there I've got up because that can be a source of weather. You know, obviously it's the sort of nationally funded weather centre, and they give incredibly good forecasts. Their mountain forecasts, specific mountain forecasts now are really good. They do summit forecasts, but they'll also do mountain areas. But there are also lots of other, you know, good options. The Mountain Weather Information Service, MWIS, will produce a forecast, you know, for the main mountain areas. There are a handful of others. But a lot of the other forecasts will work off algorithms rather than actually using a meteorologist to do it, and therefore, you know, they can come up with issues and be wrong at times. The only one I tend to use that's sort of solely algorithm based is a yr.no, which is a Norwegian website. And if I'm honest, I don't use it very much in summer, but I find it very good for freezing levels for temperatures throughout winter. So it's worth having a look at yr.no. We could always sort of go slightly older school and just watch the forecast on telly, although over the years the BBC weather forecast has sort of decreased in quality. And then even older school there, I'm not quite sure why I've put a picture up of a sort of European newspaper, but you could just look on the back of newspapers, less and less so that they publish synoptic charts, but you never know, might be an option wherever you are. So if we look at the difference between town and mountain, they're pretty great. Yeah, Kingussie at 200 meters and Skugui, they're just over 1,100 meters up. And unsurprisingly, the differences are pretty noticeable. It's really useful as a mountain leader if we understand how those changes come about, why it's different, because then if we need to, we can start to extrapolate a urban or a low-lying weather forecast into a mountainous area for the odd time we might not be able to get a mountain forecast. So why are they different? Well, they're going to be windier. It's windier up mountains than it is, down, low down. And, very simply, basically, we have a sort of cap on our weather, the top of the troposphere. And therefore, any wind that we have is going to be squashed, basically, as it goes over hills. In the same way that water will flow faster through a narrowing, through a squeeze in a river, so the wind will go faster when it has less space to flow through, as it were. And there's less space for it, if the mountains are higher. So it's squeezed, or it's funneled, into a valley, through a col, etc., etc. The general rule here that basically you can sort of take a sea level wind speed and times it by 2 to get a sort of a Monroe height wind speed is a very general rule. There is no sort of solid meteorological sort of fact in that, but it seems to work pretty well. So yeah, it's going to be windier. It's certainly going to be wetter, unfortunately. Pretty depressing statistic there. Fort William's pretty wet anyway for its average rainfall per year, but Ben Nevis, just above Fort William, is more than double the amount of rainfall. There are a number of reasons for that, and we'll look at types of rainfall and what causes rainfall in another section. Yeah, it's going to be windier, it's going to be wetter, and it's going to be colder on the whole. So there's a thing called the lapse rate, and the lapse rate depends on whether you're in unsaturated or saturated air. Now, that's not wholly useful for us as a mountain leader, because we probably don't know where the dew point is, because that will depend on various other factors. So you could say, well, I'll just subtract 6 degrees from the sea level forecast, and that will give me a Monroe temperature. What I tend to just say is I just tend to say 1 degree every 100 meters that I go up. So if I'm standing on the top of Ben Nevis, it's going to be something around 14 degrees cooler than it would be at sea level. And that tends to be often slightly sort of a cooler prediction than it actually is, but I don't think that's a bad thing, So yeah, so it's going to be windier, it's going to be wetter, and it's going to be colder. I don't think we're selling hill walking at the moment. It's not always colder though. On the very rare occasions where we get sort of temperature inversions in Britain, then we will get at times where it's going to be colder lower down and warmer higher up. They're fairly rare. And the reason that they're rare is you need really quite stable weather. Basically what happens is the cool air from the mountains sinks down into the valleys and then gets trapped in the valleys. Now, normally when we have wind and sort of passing weather fronts, that cold air sort of gets moved out by the wind. But when we've got very stable, very calm conditions, that cooler air in the valley doesn't sort of get moved on. And that will also often give us a cloud inversion as well. So it's worth sort of bearing that in mind. It's often not always picked up on weather forecasts, but it's a particular treat to be able to sort of wake up above the cloud in the warmth when down in the valley, looking down on, say, Aviemore or something is in cloud and in the clag. So on the whole, we know it's going to be wetter, we know it's going to be colder, we know it's going to be windier. But what do we really need to know from a forecast and why? What are the important things? Well, first of all, we need to know wind speed. So what's the wind speed going to be? And that's going to play a big part in my planning for a day, because wind speed is something I can't do anything about, as it were. If it was wet, I would put my waterproofs on. If it was poor visibility, I just have to navigate. If it's cold, I put more clothes on. If it's windy, there's not much I can do about it. So wind speed's really important. And on that note, wind direction is also important. You know, my clients aren't going to forgive me if I make them walk into the wind all day. Whereas they'll be pretty happy with me if I can, you know, plan a day where the wind is on my back. Temperature is going to be important because we're going to want to decide, you know, how many clothes to pack, what sort of gloves, hats, etc., etc. Is it going to be a day where we're going to be happy to stop, or are we just going to want to keep on trucking because it's chilly? And also that other end of the spectrum, you know, is it going to be really, really hot? Are we going to struggle to find water? You know, do we have to think about doing our steep ascents as early as possible before it warms up during the day? And then precipitation, you know, so I've not said rain, it could be snow, it could be sleet, it could be hail, but any moisture coming from the sky is going to sort of have a bit of an effect on my day. How good are my clients' waterproofs? Is it going to be really windy and cold as well? In which case that precipitation will have a real effect on, you know, potentially our enjoyment, but also the safety of our day. Or is it going to be, you know, drizzly showers and it's actually quite warm, and at the end of the day, that might just be uncomfortable rather than a concern. I've put those things in that order very deliberately because that's the sort of order of importance to me, as I stated earlier. The wind speed and the wind direction are really, really important, and the temperature and the precipitation may be less so. So what does wind speed mean? We often totally overestimate wind. And it's really important. You're looking on a weather forecast and it's saying it's going to be a particular wind speed. Well, unless we can if we have an idea of what that really means to us and our group, then, you know, it's pretty pointless. So 30 miles an hour is okay. You know, and unless if there's zero wind in the summer, it might be midgy, but in terms of the safety of us getting knocked around, that's not an issue. 50 miles an hour, and I'm staggering. I'm being, you know, bashed around a bit by the wind. It's hard work. It's actually using up quite a lot of energy, and potentially being sort of pushed over. At 70 miles an hour, I'm fighting to stand. You know. Just standing up and walking a few steps is going to be very difficult and therefore pretty dangerous. And then 100 miles an hour, we're basically crawling. So yeah, there's no way we can stand up. We're just crawling for progress. We could sort of liken that to how many pints of beer we've drunk. I think if I had 10 pints of beer, I wouldn't be crawling for progress. I think that would probably be considerably worse than that nowadays. But just another way to think about it. I have a rough rule of thumb on top of this. I say below 40 miles an hour, I can teach. You know, the top ends of the 30, it's really quite difficult. You know, a lot of shouting, having to get close. But I still think I can teach. Between 40 and 60, I can take people out and I can give them an experience. But I probably can't teach in that sort of weather. And that experience is not going to be, you know, near in any boulder fields, near any steep edges. And then finally, above 60, then, you know, I'm struggling to look after the safety of my group. I can't be confident that they won't get blown over, break a wrist, you know, twist an ankle, break a lower leg, etc., etc. So, you know, I've got to think very carefully if I take a group out in more than 60 mile an hour winds. And, you know, that also links to, you know, what's my aim for the day? What's the plan? You know, because like I said, they're above 40, it's really hard to teach and coach in. So if the day has got a sort of a focus on teaching navigation or something like that, then, you know, it's probably, well, we need to find somewhere more sheltered, lower, or we need to change the plan for the day. What does temperature mean? Well, obviously, the colder it is, you know, the more clothes we're going to need. But it's also worth taking into account the wind chill, which is often the big issue in Scotland. And the wind chill is most pronounced, around the sort of the hovering around zero. So you could be going out on a day, which is reasonably warm on the summit. It's like 6-degree day on the summit would be, pretty warm for Scotland. And a 40-mile-an-hour wind, which again isn't unheard of, far from it, could take us down to, it feels like, -1, which is a big difference. So we think of the days where, if we look at those temperatures, sort of from 0 degrees upwards and 40-mile-an-hour winds, then we can be anything from sort of, -9, -6, which is really pretty cold for a summer hill walker. And if we've not got appropriate equipment like windproof gloves and decent waterproofs, then that wind's really going to cut through our clients. If we can find appropriate equipment, then it's going to be a bit better. And that sort of leads smoothly onto us. There's the cheesy phrase, there's no such thing as bad weather, but just bad equipment. Well, I'd sort of beg to differ. I think there is bad weather. But for us, the important thing as a mountain leader taking people into the outdoors is to make sure that they are appropriately equipped for the day. And sometimes that will mean big, thick, warm gloves. It will mean waterproofs. It will mean lots of layers. It will mean warm drinks. It will mean hats. And sometimes it will mean the exact opposite. It will mean lots of water, sun hats, sun cream, sunglasses. Our job as a mountain leader is to make sure that people have the appropriate clothing and equipment for the day. But also to take that information, and like I said earlier, to plan a day that is going to be enjoyable for them. So here, we could apply this little sort of mock weather forecast to any mountainous area. Here I've got a map of the Cairngorms. And our weather forecast is 40 miles an hour, so pretty strong, easterly, so coming from the east. Temperature at 900 meters is 5 degrees, so that's going to give us, something around 0 degrees, feels like, with wind chill. And then in the afternoon, it's going to be wet, heavy showers. Cloud base above the summit, but as soon as those heavy showers coming, it's lowering to 750. Now again, the cloud-based lowering shouldn't be an issue for us as a mountain leader, but if our group particularly want, good views, etc., then our aim is to try and deliver that. So say we were going to go, I don't know, to the northern corries, the sort of normal way from the ski area, about 630 meters. A classic route would be sort of up the west ridge of Lochan and around. Doing it in that sort of order, maybe over Cairngorm and back down at the end of the day. That would be a bad way to do it on this weather forecast. Let's flip it on the head and say, well, what we'll do then is we'll sort of do it this way. We'll maybe fight up the ridge a little bit and we'll get a bit of wind here, but here we'll start to turn our backs, and pretty much all the way along the plateau we'll have wind on our backs and drop down. Now, if we start at normal time, we'll probably get wet. So, we don't have to stick to 9 to 5, in the mountains, certainly in the summer. It's light, nice and early. So why not self nice and early and see if you can persuade your clients to, let's leave the car park at, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and be off the hill by, 2:30, 3 o'clock. And therefore, you might be the mountain leader sitting with your clients in the cafe as the heavens open, chuckling as all those other people sort of come back into the car park or into the cafe bedraggled, having got wet in the afternoon showers. So with just a little bit of thought, we can turn what could potentially be quite a challenging forecast into, quite a nice, pleasant day. And we've done our work as a mountain leader. We've made sure they've got the right equipment, and then we've delivered a good day for them, just by looking at the forecast and planning around it. So there you go. That's what we would sort of need to know. It's what we want, the information we want from a weather forecast, and bits and pieces like that. Hope it was useful. Thanks very much.